I am Francine. I am a Brit working in the Nordic region. I don't normally do presentations this way round, though, so it's quite interesting for me to be in Sweden talking about the UK market rather than in the UK talking about the Swedish or the Nordic markets. So yeah, this has been quite an interesting exercise for me to really consider it from the other direction. Hopefully I've found some good facts and figures that you might find interesting too. But just to introduce myself briefly, so I've been working for the Nordic Music Export based out of London for the last 3 years full-time, but on their projects for 6 years now. Their projects include things like Ya Ya Ya, a live platform and a website promoting Nordic music abroad, and the Nordic Playlist, as well as working on the trade missions that you just saw some very nice pictures of with Jesper there. So I've been doing that full time, but now I'm working in more of a consultancy role. So I'm working with different streaming services, working with something called Pledge Music, and I'm working on a house called Nordic LA, a creative hub for Nordic creatives in Los Angeles. But today we're going to talk about everything that's going on in the UK. So I'm going to try and give you some facts and figures, but also just a few kind of cultural insights into the weird quirks of the UK market. Because I think if you ask anybody what they think about the UK music market, they'll probably just tell you that it's really difficult to get into, which is very true. We're a very stubborn bunch of people in England. You know, not in England, in Britain. We like our own music. We like things to be sung in English. That can cause problems for people that want to come from abroad. So there's all these different considerations. But that said, there are many, many brilliant benefits and great ways for people to come and work in the UK. So we're going to run through a few of those. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of the size. So even though we're a tiny little island, we have 65 million people living in the UK. And if you consider that 31 million of those people went to a live music event last year, then you can get some kind of an idea of the engagement that we're talking about when it comes to the UK market. Yeah, and I mean, another thing that people might think about when you're talking about UK music is just the history that we have there. We have quite a rich history of pop music, especially, just like you do here in Sweden. So I think that has definitely influenced the psyche of the way that people interact with music. We're very engaged in discovering new music. We're very open to listening to new artists, to really bigging up the newest things that we found, which can be really, really beneficial for other artists coming to work in the territory. But again, just going back to the size of it, so the music industry in the UK currently employs around 150,000 people. So it's a really huge market, and that's from people working in venues, through to the people booking venues, through to publishers, lawyers, all of the people involved in bringing music to people on a daily basis. And last year, the music industry contributed £4.4 billion to the British economy. So it's in a pretty healthy state as well. And this is a really nice time to be coming and having a chat with you about it, because had I been here 3 or 4 years ago, it would have been like, yeah, okay, well, we're not making that much money. You know, streaming's kind of making things a bit tricky for us. But that's not the case this year. All the numbers are on the up. I've got some nice figures to show you in a few minutes. So, you know, things are looking really positive, and hopefully nice and welcoming for people that want to come and work in the market. So the very first thing that I'm going to show you is this just here. So The Guardian published this article last week, I think. And it's called "Where is the Musical Underground in 2017?" And it was written by a very highly regarded music journalist called Alexis Petridis for The Guardian. And this just really struck me when I was trying to think about how to put this presentation together today, because in previous years, all The Guardian has been worried about is streaming, and is streaming the future? Yes, it is. Okay, we've answered that question. That's fine. And now they're concerned with the fact that we have too much music on offer, that now we don't have anything to discover anymore because everything's in front of us. So I just wanted to put this in front of you, just because I think it weirdly sums up this strange way that we react with music in the UK. But I'll just read this out here. So in 2017, the idea of what constitutes underground music is confused. The internet has changed everything: outlets for exposure, means of distribution, the pace at which music is disseminated and consumed. In the race to keep up, mainstream media covers a far broader spectrum of music than it did 20 years ago. I don't see what's wrong with this so far. This all sounds pretty positive. The speed with which an artist can go from recherche hipster sensation to the pages of a national newspaper, or at least its website, has vastly reduced. Again, surely that's a good thing. The old markers that you might reasonably use to denote whether music is underground or not, is it on TV, is it on national radio, is it featured in the mainstream media, no longer hold true. YouTube and social media are infinitely more important in promoting music, and anyone can upload to them. So this is brilliant news for people from Sweden who are incredibly digitally savvy. You know, they know how to get onto YouTube, they know how to use streaming services. That already puts people working from this market wanting to move into the UK in a really advantageous position, because you've been living with streaming a lot more actively than we have in the UK. You've probably 2 or 3 years ahead on a user level, of the rate that it's infiltrated households and things like that is much more advanced over here than it is in the UK. We're still kind of playing catch up there. So that is something that I think you guys should really play to your advantage whenever you're thinking about approaching the UK. But to get into the facts and figures of what we're going into now. So, some numbers. UK Music put out a report every year called Measuring Music. It's available on their website, and it's quite a good way to just get to grips with the size of the music market over there in general. But 4.4 billion, as I mentioned earlier, was the music sector's contribution to the UK economy in 2016. I did a little Google conversion for you. So that's many, many billion Swedish krona up there. Of that 4.4 billion, you'll see that 640 million came from the recorded music sector. Exports are at 2.5 billion. You have to remember, though, that 2016 was the year of Adele and Ed Sheeran, so that's a sizable number right there. And then we've already mentioned the employment numbers. So you can see everything is increasing, and those plus figures, the plus percentages, just show the overall health of the industry. So all of this is very positive, I think. And then down at the bottom here, again, this just relates to the export comment there, that 3 of the 5 biggest selling recording artists worldwide were British. So I've already mentioned Ed Sheeran and Adele, and if you can think of the third one and find me later, then I'll give you like a small prize. To break this down into a more sort of fragmented size, let's talk about the streaming side of things first, because this is the most important part of the music industry that we're talking about today. This is what I was mentioning earlier when I said that the numbers are increasing. To jump from 9.7 billion in the first quarter of 2016 to 15.1 billion streams in the UK for the first quarter of 2017, that's a massive, massive jump. And it just shows the pace at which people are really starting to engage with the services that are in front of them. I think people are nice and used to the different services that you can find music on now. They've figured out how to use them. My parents use Spotify now, that's taken them 10 years to get to grips with it, but they're doing it. So these numbers are, they're really increasing well and healthily. So if you look at this again this time next year, we should expect to be seeing a similar jump, because there's still a huge amount of people that aren't engaging with streaming services in the UK that we can pull into this number. Income from the UK operations of streaming services, mainly Spotify, it must be said, rose more than 60%, so £238.6 million came in 2016. And Spotify in the UK is now reported to be at around 10 million users. I was trying to find a really exact number before I came out here today, but I haven't. We've got a streaming panel coming up later on today, though, so perhaps we'll have a few more precise numbers in there. So the key players in the UK, obviously there are a whole bunch of streaming services out there to access, but the ones that people are engaging with the most with in the UK are as follows. Not necessarily in this order, although I think having Spotify at the top is quite obvious, and Apple Music following that is, again, quite obvious. Deezer has a whole editorial team over in the UK as well, so they're really pushing and working hard to expand into that market. Amazon Prime Music and Amazon Music Unlimited is available and working in the UK and is expected to be quite a big player over the coming years. And then there's SoundCloud, lovely SoundCloud, that has secured some funding, so it's going to be around for longer. Obviously, it's a completely different streaming setup to what we have, you know, with the paid systems of Spotify, etc. But there's a huge amount of music consumed and uploaded to SoundCloud as well. So I think it's still really important to consider that as a streaming platform and to figure out how we can best work with that in the future. And 45 billion audio streams were delivered through all of the different services available in the UK in 2016, which equates to 1,500 streams per household in the UK. So we're definitely getting there. It's all going in the right direction. Of course, there are other ways to listen to music. It doesn't just have to be streaming. So here are a couple of the other options that people have. YouTube, one of the more contentious ways of listening to music, it's so widely used. There's so many people, you know, especially in the kind of under 16 category that find and listen to music on YouTube. It's a tricky situation, you know, we're in the UK having this whole conversation about monetization and everything like that as well, just as you are over here in Sweden. So I think the fact that video streams generated £25.5 million worth of trade, less than vinyl did in 2016, is pretty crazy and something that needs to be really discussed and addressed. And again, we'll probably get into this a little bit further in the streaming panel later. But on the plus side of that, vinyl, 3.2 million vinyl albums were sold in the UK, which is great. Again, mentioning my parents, they love vinyl. They've got everything they want now, Spotify, vinyl, they're super happy music listeners now. So that's gone up to 284.7 million physical album sales income. So that's, again, a really healthy number up there. And then we get to the CD. I mean, I think this is probably a very similar situation over here. Maybe we're a little bit behind what you guys are doing, but the CD, it's clinging on. It really is. And again, that's Ed Sheeran's fault because he keeps putting his CDs in supermarkets and people keep buying them. But it's good. You know, it means we're still selling them. 47 million units sold in the UK last year, so that's good. And then downloads, they've been sort of declining for a while. They are continuing to do so, as the stats show here. So album sales and track equivalent albums totaling just under 28 million last year. So that's basically the landscape when we're looking at the recorded side of things, where people are finding music, how many people are tuning in, how much money is coming out of things. I should have mentioned right at the start, if you've got any questions, we'll have a few minutes at the end to ask, but I will also make all of these figures and things available on my website, and I'll give them to the Export Music Sweden guys so that you can get hold and you can click through to all the links and get any more information that you might need. But we'll leave that there for a minute because I want to move on to the radio landscape that we have in the UK. So this figure really blew my mind when I read it. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm so used to talking about what Sweden's like in the UK that when I figured out that 90% of the UK population listen to radio every week, that really blew my mind. I thought it'd be like 70, something like that, but it's not, it's 90. And again, if you look at this bar down at the bottom, you can see that that's the highest that it's been since 2012. So music consumption all over the place is up. So just to sort of define this a little bit more, I'm not sure if you can read it there, but 49.2 million adults, so that's people over the age of 15, tuned into their selected radio stations each week in the second quarter of 2017. So that's a nice up-to-date figure, very recent. These are a little bit less recent. This is looking at 2016, but this is to give you an idea of the number of weekly listeners on the top 10 most popular UK radio stations. So this is a mix of the BBC, the national radio station, and commercial radio stations here as well. BBC Radio 2, very popular, up there, 15.1. BBC Radio 1 is 9.9 million there. I do actually have a figure somewhere that's dropped slightly, well not slightly, it's dropped quite a bit actually. It's about 9.1 million this year due to many factors. And again, we'll be chatting more about radio later today. But you have to consider things like the age of the people that are listening to Radio 1. So Radio 1 is targeted at the under 30 age range, and a lot of those people are consuming a lot more music online. So it's not necessarily that they're losing audience so much as redistributing their audience across their different platforms and things like that. So even if that number's dropped a bit, it's still hugely important. And I've put down here as well, key tastemakers are two BBC stations, so Radio 1 and BBC 6 Music. They have different demographics, different target demographics, but they are probably the two stations that people would argue are the most important when you are trying to break a new artist into new music territory. Yeah, so that's that. And then if we just step away from radio into media, I mean, the media side of things really interests me because my background is as a music journalist. So I worked at a magazine in Paris called Les Anrocs for a long time. And then I moved over to the UK to work on the line of Best Fit, and I was there for 5 years. And now I run this great website here, Yeah. If anybody wants to go and check that out, it's a fantastic one. But this really does concern me, all of this. There's a lot of subjects that I'm sure are very relevant here in Sweden that we're talking about in the UK at the moment. Funding for music websites, funding for music journalism, journalism in general, paywalls going up around newspaper websites. There's a lot of things that are going on. But these that I've put here are just a few examples of easily accessible, very relevant new music websites. So I mean, this is very much in the pop sphere. Obviously, we've got The Independent and The Guardian up there who cover a very broad range of music. They go from classical, contemporary classical, through to jazz, through to metal, through to everything else. But on a new music level, these are some really key names that I would recommend checking out if you don't already know them. Yeah. I'm going to move on to live now, though. This is a picture taken, this is a band called Virgin Suicide, and this was taken at our Yeah London Club Night last year. Just to, put a picture in there rather than loads of numbers everywhere. The live industry in the UK is a very special place. I had a really great conversation with a colleague of mine the other day who runs our Yeah activities in Vienna. And he'd brought an artist to come over on a Monday night to perform in a club in London. And I met him the next day. And so I said, it's really nice that you've come over to do something in London. And he was like, yeah, London. I was like, oh. He was like, well, it's hard work coming over to London, isn't it? The venues can be weird, you don't get paid any money, the travel's hard, the food's terrible. Why do we want to bring our artists here? I was like, well, you make some fair points. However, it's still a really valuable place to be. And at the end of our conversation, he agreed with me. He was like, he said, I'm not saying this, I'm British, so I can't say this, but he said, if you want to be taken seriously, then you should show people that you're making steps in the UK. So if you want people in Germany to be paying attention to what you're doing, then you should have some kind of activity going on in the UK. It just kind of bolsters any kind of efforts that you're making elsewhere, which I thought was a really interesting point, and then I came back at him with all these interesting facts and things that are going on about the live industry and how, how there are steps that are currently being taken to really improve the situation for touring artists and for fans that are heading out to see music in the UK as well. So I'll come back to that in a second, but the live industry in 2016 was valued at £1 billion, and I mentioned earlier 30.9 million people attended live shows in 2016. It's probably more than that, because that's just for licensed events, and there's a lot of things that aren't in the music world. So it's probably a lot more than that, but that said, there's also, I probably went to 50 shows last year, so 50 of that is me. And then, so you have to consider that kind of thing. But audience members in front of shows, this is pretty much what we're talking about. And again, I know I keep mentioning him, but Ed Sheeran, he played 4 sold-out O2 Arena shows last year, which is about 100,000 people. So 100,000 of those are just Ed Sheeran fans. But yeah, it's an incredibly healthy market. A lot of people are going out to shows. There's a lot of sold-out shows. Lots of really exciting events going on, and the festival market is as healthy as it's ever been. But what I really want to talk about is the grassroots venues. So the people that are, the new bands that are coming from abroad and that they're trying to get a step into the industry. You go through this whole process, don't you? You find a promoter, put the show on, you do everything that you can on the internet to let whoever you're in touch with know that you're going to be there, and then you hope for the best when you get there. It's a kind of a tricky thing to do. You have to make sure that you're working with a really good promoter, and in the UK we have a lot of promoters. Some of them aren't necessarily as good as others, so if I'm ever going to offer you a tip about coming over to the UK, it's to really research who you're going to work with before you invest any money in making efforts to come over and perform, especially. But the venues themselves are something that I want to talk about, because the quality of them around the UK can be a little bit lower than it is on the continent, for example. And I have definitely met some bands. I particularly remember a German metal band that I was working with a long time ago coming to the UK and just being just laughing at the state of the backstage and everything, and that they didn't get a hot dinner and that sort of thing. So you need to be prepared for this. If you're a brand new band coming over, the treatment is a bit different. And this is one of the reasons why Export Music Sweden and the Nomex offices set up the Ja project, is to make sure that artists that were traveling into the UK industry could have a really good quality showcase situation, rather than, not necessarily getting everything that they could out of an opportunity. But to combat what I've just said, to counter that, there is a lot that's currently going on, in London especially, to really up the ante of what we're doing. So there's been a lot of investment in grassroots size venues. So I'm talking about the 100 to 250 capacity venues. Vice, the magazine, they own a couple of venues in London. They've invested a ton of money into buying up some of the smaller venues, completely speccing them out, putting really good PA systems in them, making the lights look really good, making the backstages really nice. There's another company called DHP that's done the exact same thing as well. So whereas last year, if I'd have been having this conversation with somebody, I would have said, oh, the venues are in a terrible state because they're all closing down. There's nowhere for people to play. And then if you can get a good gig somewhere, then the specs of the venue might not be great. But again, that's not really the case anymore. There's a lot of investment going in. This is a problem that's been identified and that we're really working to tackle in the UK, but especially in London at the moment. So that's really good. And then there's also some ticket initiatives that are going on to really help support venues as well. So Live Nation announced earlier this year something called... it's just called a grassroots ticketing initiative. I don't think it's got a name. But basically, each ticket purchased through this service, so it's a service that Live Nation have set up with certain venues of certain sizes. There's a direct contribution from that ticket fee into the venue. So that venue is going to automatically take out some cash for their running costs. And it's really widely explained to the customer that that's what's going to happen. And when that conversation is had, then the customer realizes the value and the importance of the venue, and they start paying a bit more attention. They start being a little bit happier to invest a bit of money into it, and realizing that that venue is where they're discovering their music and they need to be supporting it. So there's a whole holistic thing that surrounds these kind of initiatives too. And then another thing that is happening a lot at the moment is government lobbying and funding appeals, because the grassroots music sector doesn't have much funding in the UK. It really doesn't get very much. I think I should have looked this statistic up, but opera gets something like 400% more government funding per year in the UK than pop music does. You know, maybe they need it, but we need it too. So we need to make sure that this money is being spread out a little bit better. In London, in particular, we are taking steps to make sure that we have people in place to really look after the concerns of people working in the live music industry. So our mayor, Sadiq Khan, hired a person called the Knight Czar. And the Knight Czar's responsibility is to look after all of the lobbying, all of the safety issues, licensing issues, everything like that in London. And this is her. She's called Amy LeMay. She's fantastic. She's a comedian. She's a really big part of the LGBTQ community in the UK. So here she is. She's great. She's going to save the music industry in London. But she's already been making some great steps. You know, she's been working really closely with like transport links and things like that to make sure that people can get to and from shows really easily, and working with safety and sound complaints and things like that, and just making sure that everything is, you know, as good as it possibly can be. So to sum up this live rant that I've had here, it can be quite difficult to come and perform for a new artist in the UK, but it is worth doing it. We are investing a lot from our side to make sure that the spaces and situations are as good as they can be for new artists. But it is good to be cautious when you're traveling and investing in any kind of export. You know, if you're ever going to be going to another country to perform or anything, you should really be paying attention to who you're working with and what your reasons for going there are. So just so I've had that said, disclaimer. We mentioned festivals briefly. So these are the 10 largest festivals by capacity in the UK. Glastonbury is huge, obviously. It has 120,000 people attending there every year. That's not even including the staff that they have there. I think it reaches something like, I think it's almost 200,000 people that they have on site in the middle of a field in Somerset, which is more than my hometown has living there all the time. So it's pretty impressive. Download Festival, which is more of a metal rock leaning festival. V Festival is a very glossy pop festival. Reading and Leeds is a terrible place, but I went there every year for about 10 years. You know, it serves its purpose for teenagers, I think. But these just give you an idea of the size. And then the average, because of, we have 700,000 visitors in total just attending these top 10 festivals. I think it's really important to mention how many festivals there are in the UK, though. There are hundreds and hundreds of music festivals that happen every year. I've just picked out a couple more, just to give you a little bit more of an overview. Obviously, Glastonbury is huge, and it's fantastic to be able to get there and be in front of 120,000 people, but not necessarily everybody gets those opportunities. So if you don't, here are some other fantastic places that you can go. So the Great Escape Festival is a new music festival that takes place in Brighton every May. It's normally really rainy, but it's normally a really good time. They have, I think they booked 400 bands. Looking at my British friend over there, any idea? I think it was 400 bands this year. Tons and tons of new music, and I think among those were about 10 Swedish bands. The guy that books that festival is really active at coming to things like Where's the Music and, you know, showcase festivals, really paying attention. He always comes down to our Yeah nights as well to check out who we've got on. We've collaborated with The Great Escape too, so we put on a special Yeah night where they took all the artists that we'd booked and they put them on the festival. But yeah, that's a great place. Pretty much everybody in the UK live industry pops down there, so if you're looking for an agent, anything like that, it's a great place to be. Liverpool Sound City is also a really good emerging music platform. It's way up north in Scouse land. And then Soon Festival is over in Wales, and that's another really great opportunity for people. At this point, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned it yet, but I do just want to say, I have spoken a lot about London. London is not the UK, though, and that is a really important point to make. There are a lot of other places that it's really important to target and to think about when you're heading to the UK. Not just the capitals of the other countries included in the British Isles, not just Glasgow and Cardiff, but cities like Liverpool is a hugely important place to go. It's got a fantastic live music scene. I've written down here that there's some more specialist festivals too. So the Liverpool Psych Festival is an incredible time. They book bands from all over the world to come. It's always sold out. It's always really crazy. And, you know, just want to make the point that there are really avid music fans that aren't necessarily working in the capital as well, being from the suburbs myself. Yeah, so Soon Festival down in Cardiff, that's a really good celebration of especially new Welsh music, but they bring in a lot of international acts there as well. And then I just mentioned the specialist festivals, so there's tons and tons of them. So as well as the Psych Fest, there's the London Jazz Festival, and then I've put this one in because it is in my hometown. But it's so specialist that I lived in that town for 18 years, and I didn't hear about it until I was in Norway about 5 years ago. And it's called the Huddersfield International Contemporary Music Festival, the biggest contemporary music festival in Europe, I believe. It's 40 years old. It's really good. But, you know, there's just all this stuff going on all the time. So if you really do your research, there are so many platforms that you can access and that you can, you know, head out to perform at or just head out to speak to people, figure out who's who. And then just to kind of combat the really big players that I showed you in the chart earlier, these are some really amazing festivals that we have in the UK. So Green Man, End of the Road, Wilderness, Kendal Calling, they are really fantastic festivals. They're all kind of boutique, but their booking policies are great. They really look beyond the borders. They try and put really exciting programs together for the people that are going to visit. And again, they just have really active bookers that are always out at festivals looking for new artists and things like that, and that are really responsive if you are to send your music to them and propose that you might want to go and play. So the final thing that I want to mention today is this guy, Brexit. I hate that word. I hate the concept of it, but I'm not going to get too far into that today because I'll just get really riled up. But I will just say, I think it's the biggest waste of time that the UK has invested anything into in a long, long time. But we have to pay attention to it because for some stupid reason it is happening. But there are many conversations going on at the minute to try and make sure that the music industry gets the fairest deal that it possibly can out of it. But this it reaches so far that it's really difficult to even have these conversations at the minute. I'm not sure how this is reported over here in Sweden, but the conversations that are being held around Brexit are so slow and nobody's getting anywhere with them. So at the minute, no decisions have been made about anything. We just have to kind of preempt and just think ahead as to what's going to happen and just make sure that we've got our bases covered as and when things do happen. So obviously the first thing that jumps to mind with Brexit is that the borders will be more firmly closed than they have been before, and how is that going to work for touring artists? I don't know. I don't even know if, you know, my German friends are going to be able to live in the UK. I don't know. But what I can tell you is that the UK Musicians Union are looking into this at the minute. So they're looking into different methods of putting together Europe-wide work visas, so that if you're in an orchestra and you're going on tour, then you're fine. You can just get one piece of paper, everything's sorted. You won't have to pay huge visa fees every time that you want to go to a new country. So that kind of thing is all being considered. Another big conversation that's going on is copyright. So in the UK, our music licensing is covered by EU copyright laws. So we need to have a big conversation about that as well. That is all ongoing as well. But then we get to the question of importing and exporting music. Are we going to have to pay taxes on every vinyl that we want to send out? You know, if we have things pressed in Poland, how much is it going to cost? What is the cost of distribution going to be? How is this going to affect small labels especially? There's all these very complicated questions going on around this, but like I said, I have no answers. I just wanted to raise this point with you today to let you know that this is a really huge thing that we're talking about in the UK at the moment. And that we are considering it from all angles, and that all of our unions and a lot of associations are really mobilizing to try and make sure that the situation is as fair as it possibly can be for UK artists, but also for people coming to perform in the UK. And that's as much as I can say about that without getting like super angry. So I'm just going to wrap up my side of things here to say that the UK music market it's not perfect, you know, it's a tough thing to crack. It really is hard. It's a huge, huge market with lots of different approaches, lots of different angles, and lots of wrong paths that can be taken, but also lots and lots of right paths that can be taken. And just to reiterate the point that I came out with earlier, I really do think that now is the most interesting time that anybody can be looking to come to the UK. Our music fans and listeners, whether it's to combat weird political situations or whatever, but they're as mobilized as they ever have been. And they're going out to shows, they're buying music, they're streaming music, they're consuming everything that's put in front of them. And they're very open-minded about it as well. I mean, as I'm pretty sure the situation is here in Sweden, like on Spotify, the New Music Friday lists are just wildly, wildly popular in the UK. People are really open to tracking down new things, to the point that people are complaining that it's too easy to track down new things, which is a reference to the Little Guardian article earlier. But we will continue to do exactly as we have done. We'll be putting on live shows every single night. We hope that many of your artists, if you're artists yourselves, will come over and try it all out. And I just want to point out the Export Music Sweden guys as well, and what a brilliant job they do at providing information like this on a day-to-day basis for all of you guys. So please do access them and talk to them as much as you possibly can. They're a great, great tool to have. And I think that's about it. Does anybody have any burning questions? Or can I have a drink of water really quick? Okay, well, I'm going to be wandering around for the rest of the day, so if anything does come up, then please do feel free to come over and say hi. But thank you very much for your time. I hope that's given you a bit of an idea of some of the numbers and everything else that we have going on. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.